Welcome, everyone, to Unit 3, Lesson 3. Today, we're going to be talking about the presidency of George Washington, this nation's first president in the new Constitution. For our central idea, we're going to be focusing on how America is going to enter the period of the Constitution, how we'll become economically stable, but politically divided under Washington, and what we're going to be dealing with on a foreign policy standpoint. For your essential question, you're going to be determining the successes that Washington is going to have in his presidency. As Washington enters his presidency, he's going to do a few things. One of the first of which is going to be to create a cabinet, a group of advisors to assist him in his presidency. He accepted that he didn't know everything, and he sought advice from people who he thought were intelligent. Two such figures are going to be the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, and the Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. These two figures in particular are going to have a very bad history with each other. Another action we're going to see is the Judiciary Act of 1789, which will create the federal court system. These federal courts will include district courts and appeal courts, which mainly are going to focus on your laws that will happen every day, but will also create the United States Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. They are going to have much more importance as we go into the next few presidents. The Congress is also going to agree to pass the Bill of Rights, a document also written by James Madison, the same man who wrote the Constitution. This is going to be added to protect individual rights for people and to limit the power of the government in infringing rights. Some of the major amendments that you may know from the Bill of Rights, which is 10 amendments, may be the First Amendment, which will be about freedom of expression. You have the freedoms to religion, assembly, petition, press, and speech. The 10th Amendment is going to be an overarching amendment, which will say that anything that is not listed for the federal government in the Constitution is going to end up becoming a state's right. That's going to be a very important concept that we saw in the first lesson of the unit, the concept of federalism. As we enter the time period of a new government, we're still dealing with a lot of issues that we'd seen under the Articles. The main issue is the fact that we never really had an opportunity to create a well-funded government. This is going to end up falling onto the back of Alexander Hamilton, the new Treasury Secretary. He is going to have to approach several different ways of getting the country money. One of those ideas is going to be a concept called tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods from other countries. We will use this to raise money as other countries are trying to sell their goods in America. It'll also protect American businesses from foreign competition by making American goods relatively cheaper compared to foreign goods. This, however, will cause tension as foreign countries will put tariffs on our goods. Alexander Hamilton is going to have a four-part system to protect the country, his financial plan. The first of which were those tariffs, but also something called an excise tax. His tariff of 1789, our first year under the Constitution, is going to focus on the foreign imports as well. This is going to also put an excise tax on certain goods, and in particular, whiskey. This is going to cause a lot of tension as we move forward. This is going to be the plan for paying the government as we move in. The North will approve because this will protect American business, but the South and the West are going to be angry, as exports that they would sell to other countries, like tobacco or indeed whiskey, will be taxed, but you also have that new designated whiskey tax, which will hurt corn farmers the most. Be aware, corn is perhaps at this time the second most cultivated product behind tobacco. The reason being, you can grow it on a lot less land, so even smaller farmers can potentially use that as a major crop. We'll see this cause tension in a few slides. Part 2 of the Hamilton Plan is going to be to pay back war bonds. During the American Revolution, we proposed war bonds to the citizens. You give us money now, and we'll give you more money once we can afford it. We'll start to pay these war bonds back so we don't get more interest on them, or more money accruing on it that we'd have to pay the further that we go. The North is going to be in favor of this because most of the people up there were the people that would own those bonds. In the South and the West, They didn't like this because their tax money is now going to pay for those northern bonds. Part 3, we're going to see what's called the assumption of state debt, in which the federal government will take all of the war debt from the states under their one purview, which means that instead of South Carolina paying for South Carolina's debt, South Carolina now has to pay for the debt for all 13 states. But the 12 other states are also doing the same thing. In the North, this is going to be good because this is where most of the major war debt is going to be located, particularly in Massachusetts and New York. In the South, they aren't going to like this because it's more federal government power, and many of the southern states had already paid off their debts. States like Virginia had already managed to pay off all of the debts that they accrued during the Revolution. Part 4 of the financial plan is going to be by far the most important and the most controversial of the 4 parts. The creation of the Bank of the United States, a national bank that will manage our economy, our debt, and our currency. In the North, they're going to favor this, as they'll be able to buy stock in the business, something that you won't see in the South or the West. In those other areas, many people will actually think that this bank is unconstitutional. Indeed, it's not specified at all in the Constitution. It is not mentioned once. Now, as we mentioned, there's going to be some tension that will build up as we go into the financial plan, particularly when it comes to that excise tax on whiskey. Western farmers are going to be very angry over this tax, and they're going to attack tax collectors, and they're going to go in and disrupt courts. Now, if you remember, we had Shays's rebellion in the Articles of Confederation. There was no military to stop it. We feared that this may end up being the same thing, but we showed that we're under a different government, as George Washington will personally lead 15,000 troops to crush this rebellion, something that was impossible under the previous government. While it wasn't a massive issue, this is going to show that we really have changed as a country over the past few years. We now have a government that has strength. We now have a single leader that can lead the country in this way. And this is going to show that our government is already stronger than the previous one that we had. Now, while we have our issues going on at home, there are also going to be foreign issues that we have to pay attention to. In France, they will have their own revolution, inspired by ours, that will get out of hand. Indeed, the monarchy there will end up being killed by the citizens. Later on, France will end up declaring war on Britain, and that's going to cause trouble because we trade with both nations. For the most part, you're going to see the people in our country react in one of two ways. Your Federalists, or those that support a strong central government, will support Britain because of their strong central government. A group known as the Democratic Republicans, which we'll focus on tomorrow, would support France due to their weak central government. We're going to start to see tension within America on foreign issues, something that really had never happened up to this point. Washington is going to decide to pick neither side. We will choose a foreign policy approach of neutrality, the concept in which we will trade with both sides, but we will not pick one individual side to support. Both Britain and France didn't like this. Both wanted their own special treatment. This is going to cause tension for us, particularly with Britain, as they'll do two major things that will cause tension within America. The first is impressment, in which they would capture American sailors at sea and force them to join the British Navy. This means that American citizens are going to be forced to fight on Britain's side in this war. They will also still use the forts in Western America that they claimed they were going to give up, but they never did. They will give Indians weapons, and the Indians will end up attacking us as we try to settle there. To prevent future issues, Washington is going to send John Jay, an influential American figure, to Britain to avoid war. While we do avoid war, this is not going to be a positive for us. The Jay Treaty is going to be one of the most lopsided treaties we've ever seen against America. Effectively, what it said was, we won't go to war with you, but You can continue to impress our citizens and force them to fight with you. You'll give up your forts in the Americas, which they still didn't, and we will give them the most favored nation trading status. This is going to mean that if we're trading, we'll first go to Britain. This is going to mean that in America, we really didn't get anything except avoiding a conflict. In France and Spain, they're going to think that we're now getting closer with Britain. Ironically, the first real war we get into, as we will see in this unit, is not with France or Spain. It's going to be with Britain. The second treaty that we're going to see is Pinckney's Treaty. This is going to be a treaty between us and Spain, particularly with the land between America and Spanish Florida. What this is going to mean is that Spain will allow us to use the Mississippi River and to use the city of New Orleans for trade. And we will be able to figure out where boundaries lie to avoid future conflict. This is going to improve the relationship between America and Spain, and is going to allow us to be happy because we have more land to settle on and more areas to trade in. The final treaty that we'll end up seeing in Washington's presidency is going to be around the issues with Native Americans. We are continuing to try and settle in the areas that we got in the Northwest Territory, but the Native Americans are still going to attack us as we go out. Now, if you remember, many of these Native Americans were actually provided weapons by the British, so that's going to end up becoming an issue as we go on to the later times. There's only one battle that takes place, the Battle of Fallen Timbers, in which the Americans are going to defeat the Indian forces. It seems like tension's over, and we'll end up getting a treaty called the Treaty of Greenville, which is going to draw a line, as you can see in the map on the bottom right, that will separate American land and Indian land. While this is good in the short term, as you'll learn, many treaties between America and Indians don't last, and it's going to be because of American actions. We're getting close to the end of Washington's presidency, which we will see in the next lesson. Tomorrow we'll focus on the Adams administration, our second president in the United States. Thank you guys. I'll see you then.